All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this round of workshops. So today we're here for National Practice Guidelines for peer specialists and supervisors. And we're going to hear that doorbell every 5 seconds until everybody gets in the room. So welcome, everyone. My name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I work for NYAPRS, and I'm going to be with you today doing the tech support on the back end of things. So just a couple quick things for housekeeping before I turn it over to our wonderful panelists. The first is that today's webinar is being recorded and that you'll be able to find the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides on the NYAPRS website within a few days at www.nyaprs.org, and I'll put that in the chat box as well for you. We're also providing continuing education units for this workshop for CPRPs, CRCCs, social workers, LMHCs, and certified peers through the New York State Peer Certification Board, which is awesome. So the only thing you need to do in order to receive CEs is to have registered and paid in advance, and then to return the evaluation that will be sent to everyone that attends the workshop. So I'll send that out to you this afternoon. And we, of course, want to hear from everyone, and we want to get feedback from everyone. But it is important, if you do need those continuing ed credits, that you return your evaluation within 48 hours. That's really important, just because of the sheer volume of the number of credits that the office has to process. We are using the meeting platform today for Zoom, so we do ask that you keep your phones muted and your cameras off so that we can focus on our panelists. If there tends to be a bunch of background noise, I won't hesitate to go through that participant list and mute you myself, but hopefully we won't have to do that. We do want to hear from you though, but because we have so many people in the room, we ask that you use the chat box to communicate with us and to communicate your comments and your questions to all panelists. And we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation today. So feel free to chat in throughout, and we'll keep track of everything. And we'll make sure we address your questions and comments at the end. Oh, and the only other thing about CEs is that in order to get your CEs, you have to be present in the room and not by dialing in. So you have to be on the virtual platform. What else? Last thing, closed captioning is available for this workshop. In order to enable closed captioning, we ask that you hover your mouse over the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your screen. There'll be an arrow in the right-hand corner. Click on that arrow and then select Show Subtitle. So with all that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and come off camera and turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Welcome.
Thank you. And so I will just, I'm Rita Cronice, and I'll just mention who our presenters are for today. We have Jonathan P. Edwards, we have Ivana Bond, we have Joanne Forbes, and we have myself, and we also have technical support from Varsha Kamat, who is with the Academy of Peer Services. We'll do a longer introduction to ourselves in a few moments, but I'm going to go ahead at this moment and hand the baton over to my colleague, Dr. Jonathan Edwards.
Thank you so much, Rita. And part of me is tempted to ask, who is that? Anyway, I'm Jonathan Edwards, and I'm really happy to be here this afternoon with my colleagues. Thank you so much, NYAPRS, for hosting this wonderful virtual conference. And thank you, Daniela, for sort of welcoming us and warming the room for us. So I'm representing the National Association of Peer Supporters. And just for full transparency, we recently rebranded and refocused on more national initiatives. And so you may sometimes hear international, you may hear INAPS, but we are now the National Association of Peer Supporters, abbreviated as NAPS. And our mission is to grow the peer support profession by promoting the inclusion of peer specialists throughout healthcare and other community systems worldwide. And our vision, it's really important to have a vision, is that peer support is a viable option for anyone who wants the mutuality of a compassionate peer support relationship. So today's presentation is largely a product of the Workforce Development and Supervision Committee. We meet regularly to advance the profession of peer support, as well as develop supervision standards, which you'll hear a lot about today. We're going to start off by inviting each of you on the next slide to type one word into the chat. And we ask you and emphasize, please, one word so that this exercise works. We're going to ask you to describe your favorite supervisor in one word, and that could be a current or former supervisor. I'll also mention as you're doing this that you may hear the doorbell a lot, case in point, and that is our background ambient music. That indicates that someone's entering the chat room, so the challenge is to not let that distract us. So please, for those of you who may have just joined, we're asking everyone to type in one word to describe your favorite supervisor, and that could be your current or a former supervisor. And I think I'll do the exercise as well.
Jonathan, do you want to mention where the chat box is sometimes?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Varsha. So if you are looking for the chat box, there is a bubble at the bottom of the screen. And if you click on that, a dialog box will pop up. And at the bottom, it'll ask you to type your message here. So if anyone has any issues with that, let us know through the chat, and we will get you some technical assistance because there will be other exercises using the chat box.
Nice.
So we're seeing some really great responses come in. Patient, confident, visionary, supportive, educational. I put innovative because my supervisor oftentimes made me feel more important than I really was, and that was my coping mechanism. So innovative is really important. A believer. Let me see what else. Motivational, trusting, committed, supportive, straightforward, funny, iconic, fearless, a mentor, funny, a former supervisor, okay, wise, understanding, available, interested, strong, recovery-oriented, free, guiding, kind, relentless, independent, supportive. Hello, Miriam. Anyway, so we're collecting these. We're going to give you another few moments, and then we're going to move on. And I'm going to be back with you shortly. Don't hold your breaths. But now I'll pass the baton to my esteemed colleague, Ivana Bond, who will introduce herself and share a little bit about the work that she is doing. So we're going to move along. Hello, Ivana.
Hi, Jonathan. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm Ivana Bond, and I'm the chairperson of the New York City Peer Workforce Coalition. Soon I will put, in a break here, I will put our website in the chat. But just wanted to tell you a little bit about New York City Peer Workforce Coalition. We are a group of New York City area peer specialists and people who would like to be peer specialists. We actually represent people from the substance use disorder or SERPA, as well as certified peer specialist certifications. We have monthly meetings, we have workshops at every meeting. And we use that time to share information and to get together as a workforce so that we can have a united voice and be strong in our stance in our new profession as peer workers. So that's what we basically do at the New York City Peer Workforce Coalition. So, and with that, I will pass it on to, may I have the next slide?
Oh, sorry. There you go. Peer Workforce Coalition.
Yeah, there I am. That's our logo. It's our brand new logo. And oh, thank you. Daniela has put the Peer Workforce Coalition website in the chat for you. Thank you, Daniela. Appreciate it. And now I'll pass it on to Joanne.
Thank you, Ivana.
Joanne Forbes.
And as we wait for the responses that Jonathan was naming out. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. As I said, my name's Joanne Forbes, and I am a member of the National Association of Peer Supporters, Learning Collaborative and Workforce Development Committees. I'm very honored to be part of that work. Later in this webinar, I'll be sharing with you results of research that I conducted across the United States. I had the privilege and the pleasure of talking to a variety of peer support specialists. That's what I call them for my research, although peer support workers, there's all kinds of titles out there, as you all know. But I had the pleasure of talking to folks across the country who helped me understand what the experiences were like in being supervised by non-peer supervisors. So I will talk to you more about that later in this webinar. And I hear some background noise, but that's fine. We're in the technological age. I will pass
a lot of background
over to Rita Cronice.
Pay attention to the cues.
Okay, thank you. I was just preparing the word cloud that we're doing. I'll come back on camera for a moment here. Can you all hear me? So I'm Rita Cronice, and I am currently the coordinator for the Academy of Peer Services virtual learning community. I also do instructional design for many of the courses in the Academy. But the reason that I'm part of this particular session is that I've been part of the workforce development group at what used to be NYAPRS, is now NAPS, the National Association of Peer Supporters. At one time, I had stepped into an interim position as director of the organization, and I was actually privileged to be part of the development of the original national practice guidelines that we established back in 2013. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few moments, but for right now, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're here to accomplish today. But before I do even that, I'm going to introduce Varsha Kamat, who is, Varsha, do you want to say a word about yourself? Varsha, are you there?
I think she's muted.
My name is Varsha Kamat. I work at the Academy of Peer Services as a technical specialist. I am based in New Jersey. You probably have seen me in the previous NYAPRS conferences. In fact, the picture which Rita put it online is one of my pictures from there, which Miriam took it. Anyway, I have nothing more to add. We will be here to help you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Varsha. So I wanted to come back around to, we started the session with just in a word, describe your favorite supervisor. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a moment because I had to do this on a different computer. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over here. And what we'll see is a word cloud of what you all came up with, which I think is really inspiring, you know, supportive, compassionate, funny, leadership, wise, believer, that's a great word. So this is just a word cloud of what you all said about your favorite supervisor. And these are the kinds of things that we do look for in our leaders and our supervisors. So with that, I'll stop sharing this screen and come back to the main screen. And move ahead with our presentation to, oops, I keep going backwards. I don't know what that's about. What we're going to do next is a roll call, but before we actually go to this, we are going to have you take a poll. And the poll is, in the poll, you're going to describe whether you are a supervisor or a peer support specialist or a service user or a family member or a non-peer provider. And here's how it's going to work, because we kind of had to do a little bit of a technology dance to make this happen. But what we will do in a moment is put a link in the chat. When you click that link, you'll be able to answer the polling question. When you finish answering the polling question, this is what the poll will look like. So you just designate who you are. Then what you'll do is in the bottom of your screen, you'll click the Zoom icon in the bottom of your screen again. So Stephen, could you come off camera, please? Thank you. And if you happen to go to the next page in the survey, just close the tab and do not click the survey that goes with SurveyMonkey. Otherwise, you're going to be off in outer space somewhere. So don't do that. Just when you finish answering the survey, come back to the Zoom meeting. So Varsha, if you would go ahead and put the link in the chat, then everybody, you can just go ahead and indicate who you are, you know.
I just did.
And after you fill out that question, just return to the Zoom link and you'll be back in the meeting again. We're going to do this a couple of other times for some more complicated surveys, but while you're answering that question, I'll just go over the objectives for this session. Our objectives are to describe the origin of the guidelines for the peer workforce that were developed originally, talk a little bit about the supervision of peer support specialists, and then the development of guidelines for supervisors, and then look at the guidelines in action. We'll do a couple of role plays around the guidelines. So now, Varsha, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if you're ready to share the results of our poll. So it looks like we have a couple of supervisors in the room, several peer support specialists, service provider, we've got a service provider, but it looks like we're predominantly peer support specialists and then some supervisors. So Joanne's going to have a lot to say about that because her study was really a study of peer support specialist experiences in supervision. And Varsha's just refreshing the screen to see if we have any more. Yeah, we have a couple of others. So none of the above. So we've got a few people who are not supervisors, peer support specialists, service users, or family members. So thank you, Varsha. Cool. Okay, so thank you. And we'll return to the presentation. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit of a history lesson about Medicaid billable services, which started in 2007. That's when the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services recognized peer support as an evidence-based practice. Dennis Smith was the director of Medicaid CMS at that time, and he issued guidance to each of the state Medicaid directors because every state plan is different for Medicaid, so the states had different ways of billing for services. What he issued was guidance for state-approved training, care coordination, and supervision by a competent mental health professional as defined by the state. So each state had the opportunity to define supervision in any way that they wanted to. And this is not just for peer support specialists. All states have their own rules and guidelines for how Medicaid is billed. I also wanted to mention that Medicaid billable services is what gets a lot of attention, but peer support services have been happening for a much longer time. In fact, since the 70s and the 80s, peer-run organizations have been billing for state block grants and counties and state funding for peer support service for a very long time. And what has happened is what used to be a purely peer kind of initiative where peers were the core business of peer support was the business of the peer-run organizations. That has shifted now with the moving into traditional service settings that Medicaid bills services for, which has caused some friction between the way in which people who traditionally used to do peer support are now doing it in service settings that are not where peer support is not the core business of the organization. So, but going back to 2007, when Medicaid started being able to bill peer services, you were able to be reimbursed for peer services. There were no practice standards at that time. And then the National Association of Peer Supporters led by Steve Harrington, had been in a position, they had been in existence since 2004 and had been doing things like member surveys, newsletters, outreach to their organizations. Around that time, they did a situational analysis of the peer support workforce. And then we did a task force to look at what documentation, what guidelines existed for peer support specialists. And a lot of what we found during that time was a lot of liability concerns and issues of peer support shall not do this, peer support shall not do that in many of these more traditional settings. And as we looked at that, as the task force looked at the guidance that was being issued to peer support specialists, we were realizing that you really cannot define a profession based on the guidance that says what you shall not do. And so we started really looking for more kinds of guidelines that were around what peer support could do. What we found was information from the consumer operated services, and out of trauma-informed peer support. Those were the two areas where we found a lot of really good guidance in what peer support can do, what the core values of peer support are, and what peer support looks like in practice. So our task force took these recommendations to SAMHSA. There was an expert panel, and they brought in the substance use community. We had 10 core values that we took to SAMHSA. We left the SAMHSA meeting with 12 core values, so it went from 10 to 12 because the substance use community added 2 more. We did a consensus building process very similar to what the white paper was. In fact, we asked Steve Michio for guidance on how he did the white paper here in New York for the 10,000 voices that really brought consensus around that white paper. And we used a very similar process to get agreement on the core values for the national practice guidelines. And that's really how they came about. So here's kind of the Boy Scout motto version of the core values. Peer support is voluntary, peer supporters are hopeful, non-judgmental, open-minded, empathetic, respectful, facilitate change, honest and direct, mutual and reciprocal. It's about equally shared power, strengths-focused, transparent, and person-driven. We'll go into a little bit more detail in a little while when Jonathan looks at that, because we took these basic core values and what they look like in practice. Now, Steve Harrington was a peer support specialist. We looked at all of the input we got from the consensus building process. We had 1,000 people that participated in that consensus building process that were peer supporters themselves. 98% agreement. Where in the world do you get 98% agreement on anything? Steve Harrington then took that and created what this looks like in practice, and that's what the core values are based on. So with that, I will pass this over to Jonathan to give us a little bit more of a background in how we took those basic guidelines and then applied them to supervision.
Thank you again, Rita. So as Rita pointed out, you know, there are 12 guidelines and or 12 core values. And the one that we're really going to be focusing on today is peer specialists facilitating change. But before we do that, we'd like to sort of give you a little bit of background in terms of how the workforce development and supervision work group came to be, and some of the work that we're doing and why it's very important in terms of impacting the peer support workforce. So if we can go to the next slide. So we have a project timeline, history in the making, because oftentimes, you know, we hear about, you know, advocacy efforts and sort of more frontline boots on the ground initiatives that are considered historical, and they truly are, but there's also a lot of behind the scenes work that gets done in terms of advancing the peer support workforce. And so several years ago, and I think it was the fall of 2017, we convened a small work group to conduct a needs assessment of resources to inform the field on supervision of peer support staff. And as this field continues to burgeon, the needs of supervisors is growing, and we can certainly see that there's a gap in terms of understanding who peer supporters really are, what their role is, what the tasks are, what the values and principles are. And so that really called upon us to say what exists out there to really help people who are supervising peer supporters to understand the field and the work. And we expanded the work group to collaborate with the National Association of Peer Supporters, and then we use INAPS here on the timeline because at the time that was how the organization was designated. And so we collaborated with National Association of Peer Supporters on the peer support workforce development projects. So with that, we identified and reviewed and we indexed all of the supervision resources that we could find. And this included webinars, presentations, papers, essays, white papers, gray literature, articles. And from that, we built a repository which resides currently on the National Association of Peer Supporters website. From there, we researched Department of Labor processes for establishing a standard occupational classification of the peer support title. And that is an entire conversation in itself, and I don't want to sort of veer off too much, but this really has to do about advocating for the profession of peer support to have a discrete occupational title with the U.S. Department of Labor. So then from there, we revisited the process for creating the 2013 National Practice Guidelines that Rita just talked about. So we created a framework for developing what we now have as the guidelines for supervisors. We conducted a needs analysis, drafted guidelines for supervisors. We held several focus groups and the consensus survey with supervisors and peer specialists. From there, we developed and delivered a sneak peek presentation of the practice guidelines for supervisors for peer support specialists at the 2018 NYAPRS conference and at the NAMI conference of that year. And then we subsequently presented our first roadshow workshop, Daring to Supervise workshop series and supervision caucus at the National Association of Peer Supporters 13th annual conference, which was last October in San Diego. And that really, it feels like yesterday. And I'm just so glad that we have this virtual platform to still come together. So this is sort of some of the background of the workforce development projects that are being done to advance our profession. So if we could go to the next slide. So here I started to say earlier that of the 12 practice guidelines, the one that we'll really be focusing on during this workshop is number 6. And you can see there we have that sign about enough injustice. And I think just based on our personal experience and everything that we see going on in the news today, we can certainly understand the many manifestations of this slogan, enough injustice. And so with that, we're going to talk a lot about the practice guideline of peer supporters facilitating change, which is core value number 6. And again, there are 12 core values, and the one that we'll really be focusing on today is number 6. So I think at this point, we're going to actually go to the guidelines to show you where they're available. Rita's going to bring up a document, and I'm sort of going to walk through a little bit of how this guideline has been operationalized for supervisors.
Oh, I'm trying to share my screen. I don't. Is it
Thank you
sharing
all
yet?
for being so patient with our very complex technology.
Is it sharing? Are you seeing it? You're not seeing it.
Not yet,
No.
but we'll get there.
Okay, hang on.
So I'll try to pick up once the visual comes up. I'll try to sort of synchronize what I'm saying with what you'll see on the screen. So basically what we'd
Sorry
like
about
to
that. Got it.
Here we go. I think it's coming up. Here we go. So Rita's going to scroll down to number 6. Thank you. And we're here. Okay. Thank you again. So you could see in this matrix that we have 3 columns, and the first one is what the core value actually is, and that's that peer supporters facilitate change. In the second column is the guideline, and that really corresponds with the practice that the peer specialist engages in, and that is to educate and advocate. And in our third column, we show how supervisors promote this practice. So it's really important to focus on the fact that what the supervisor's role is and what this workshop is really all about is focusing on the supervisor's role in promoting the practice of the peer specialist educating and advocating. It took me a few times to get this. So, you know, like you're in the right place. And so an example of that is, you know, when we look at why it's so necessary for peer specialists to facilitate change, we know that some of the worst human rights violations are experienced by people with psychiatric trauma or substance use challenges, and that these individuals are frequently seen as objects of treatment rather than human beings with the same fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as everyone else enjoys. And so hence, if we go into column 2, we see that the peer supporter or peer specialist recognizes and finds appropriate ways to call attention to injustices, just as much as they strive to understand how injustices may affect individuals they serve or support. And third, because I'm not going to read them all, another example is how peer supporters encourage, coach, and inspire those they support to challenge and overcome injustices. That's so much of the work. And I don't want to get into this whole political thing about medication, but we know that engagement and support has so much more to do with what happens within the four walls of a treatment or service setting. So it's really about helping people to facilitate change in their own lives by modeling it. And the supervisor's role then is to define and model this advocacy role for peer support specialists, including advocating for organizational changes, because we know that stuff trickles down, to also coach peer support specialists on how to respect the rights of individuals while also helping them challenge and overcome injustices. And third, to build on lived experience to model recovery and advocate for peer support workers. And so just for the sake of time, I won't go on. There's like 3 more practice guidelines for peer supporters, and then 3 more corresponding ways that the supervisor can support that role. What we're going to do now is we're going to sort of share some demonstrations of how these practice guidelines are operationalized in several different role plays. So I'm going to go off camera again and turn it over to my colleagues, Idealistic Ivana and Realistic Rita.
Hi, Rita. Thank you. Thank you so much for meeting with me.
So let's go through the scenario first, and then we'll so they know what we're talking about.
Definitely.
And we'll come back to introducing ourselves. Sorry, I should have jumped to the other slide. So
That's okay.
This is our scenario for everybody. This is the person that Ivana is coming to talk to her supervisor about is Barry. He's a 32-year-old African-American man receiving peer support services who has been court-ordered to take antipsychotic medication by injection. He has gained close to 60 pounds since the treatment began 4 months ago. Barry says he has tried to control his eating and increase his exercise to lose weight, but it isn't working. He feels that he's been fighting a losing battle with weight gain, and his doctor doesn't seem concerned about how harmful this is to both his physical and his mental health. So Idealistic Ivana, she is a newly certified peer support specialist, and she is sharing this situation with her supervisor. And I'm a traditional supervisor. I'm not a peer-informed supervisor. We have hired peers fairly newly into our organization, so I'm still kind of getting my feet wet with what all of this is about with peer support. So with that, we'll go ahead and launch into our demonstration. Okay, hi Ivana, what's going on?
Hey Rita, thank you so much for speaking with me. So I'm here to talk today about Barry. I think that you have his information and we've spoken a little bit before about it. He has gained a significant amount of weight and it is causing him a lot of stress. And the background story is that Barry is, he's the last person in his family to get diabetes. He hasn't gotten diabetes yet, but he's really, really worried about it. And I can really identify with this because, you know, I actually have a history of diabetes in my family, and it's something that, you know, it's very frightening to see. He's under court order, you know, he's mandated to take medication, um, and he's tried all these different techniques to you know, mitigate the issue of his weight. It's 58 pounds in 4 months, so I believe it's 4 months. So you know, that's a significant amount of weight, and the things that he's been trying haven't been working. And you know, he's very nervous. He's having trouble sleeping. He gets stressed out. He wakes up. He eats. So you know, I just feel that Barry really should, you know, be taken seriously as the center of his treatment plan. And, you know, I think that I want to do something about it.
Yeah,
You know,
so
well,
what do you
what do you
think?
think?
Well, I was going to say, what are you thinking you need to do at this point?
Well, you know, I just feel like sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the doctors, the doctors who are connected with the court-ordered medication, they don't want to be bothered. And what I really want to do is advocate for Barry. You know, I am certified. I'm a certified peer specialist, and we had a module about advocacy. And I want to go and I want to talk to the doctor. Barry is, you know, I've spoken to Barry about it, and he's open to the idea of me going to the doctor and just letting the doctor know that Barry should be the center of his treatment plan, right? So, and again, this is something that I feel very strongly about because, you know, I have this personal history, but
I'm wondering, you know, because of your personal history, I know that that's a lot of what peer support is about, and that's how you make connections, and that's really important to being a peer. But do you think maybe you're over-identifying with what Barry's going through? Are you putting too much of yourself into this? I'm just wondering.
uh, I don't, I don't think so. Uh, but I mean, maybe I don't really know about that, but um, I do know that as an advocate, you know, that's part of the reason why I became a peer specialist is to advocate for people. And I want to go and I want to let that doctor know that, you know, we talk a lot about the fact that the patient should be the center of the treatment plan, but I feel like Barry is not being taken seriously.
Yeah, I
So,
wonder if that's because he hasn't been able to stick with a treatment plan, you know, because I would imagine that's why he's court ordered to be treated. So, you know,
right.
what would that, have you worked with Barry on making sure that he's sticking with his plan and then discussing with his doctor
Right.
what's happening with that?
Well, we've been doing, you know, kind of harm reduction techniques of smaller plates and keeping a food journal, but it hasn't really made a difference in his weight gain. And Barry thinks that it's the medication, and I agree with Barry. And I want to support him, and I want to go and I really want to go and advocate to the doctor, you know, and advocate for Barry on behalf of Barry at the doctor, and you know, let them know that.
That might be a good step further down the line. I think, you know, what we talk about though is creating that wellness, that recovery plan, that wellness plan, you know, that he works with
Right.
his recovery plan, and within that plan, there might be opportunities for him to figure out what his next steps are. Does that sound reasonable to you?
I mean, I'd really like to advocate for him, but I guess I see what you're saying in terms of um, you know, following the plan. I guess we haven't tried everything. I don't know. I hear what you're saying.
Well, why don't we see how this goes? You're due to see me again in 2 weeks, and maybe if it's really continuing to go in this direction, we can look at other options. But let's try this for now. Does that sound like a good plan?
Okay, we'll try. I'll try.
Okay. So that was I'm stepping out of the role of realistic Rita and becoming resilient Rita again. That's how I identify myself now, and idealistic Ivana. What we're going to do is give you all an opportunity now to sort of look at. We have these guidelines that we're going to have you take a look at and sort of say, do you agree or disagree? Did the supervisor act in ways that help to uphold the practice guidelines for core value number 6? And you'll be given those core values. When Varsha opens the chat, I'm just going to remind those of you that were here and let those of you who just joined later that we will be putting this link to the poll in the chat. When you click on that link, you'll go off to another place, and when you get finished, there will be 6 questions that you'll answer. And after you're done answering those questions, you click done, and you're going to want to come back to the Zoom meeting to make sure that you go out and then come back to the poll. So I'm going to give us just about 1.5 to 2 minutes to go out to when Varsha's going to put that link in the chat.
I did already.
Okay. So now that the link is in the chat, go ahead and answer those questions and then come on back to the main session. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly. So did this supervisor define and model advocacy for peer support specialists, including advocating for organizational changes? Did this supervisor coach the peer support specialist on how to respect the rights of individuals while helping individuals challenge and overcome injustice? Did this supervisor build on lived experience, model recovery, and advocate for the peer support worker? Did this supervisor assist colleagues to understand the peer support specialist role, identify situations in which the supervisor has a responsibility to address agency liability while maintaining if differences occur, and provide time and support for the peer support specialist to connect with and participate in the greater peer movement? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and allow Varsha to share what you all thought. So did Rita define and model advocacy? We had some agree, but several more disagreed. Okay. Coach the peer specialist on how to be respectful of rights of individuals. Some people agreed, more people disagreed. Build on lived experience, model recovery, and advocate for peer support workers. We had more agreement there, but still more people disagreed. Assist colleagues to understand the peer specialist role. A few people agreed, many people disagreed. Well, actually, it was more closer to even there. Identify situations in which the supervisor had responsibility to address agency liability and maintain respectful communication. So that was about an even split, about half agreed and half disagreed. And that would be the last one, right? Oh, the last one is provide time and support for the peer support specialist to connect with and participate in the greater peer movement in the peer support profession. So that was a slightly less agreed, more people disagreed. So it looked like a lot of people disagreed with the way that Realistic Rita handled that situation. So thank you, Varsha. If you'll release the screen and I will come back to our session. So thank you, everyone. Jonathan or Ivana or Joanne, any comments before we move on to the next role play?
This is Jonathan. I think for myself, I may want to wait until we see the second role play. I don't want to bias anything, but I certainly do have a couple of observations to share about the report out. and really thank everyone for participating in it and really getting on board with the technology.
And I just wanted to ask Ivana, what was that like for you as the peer specialist to have a supervisor that was not necessarily attuned to the peer values?
Well, you know, as a peer specialist, you know, there was frustration. I'm going to be very honest and frank. It was, but it's not something that I haven't seen. It wasn't uncommon, but it wasn't necessarily uh, enjoyable for as a peer specialist to encounter that level of resistance. But more often than not, I think.
And Rita, I would just comment that as I watched it unfold, what occurred to me is that realistic Rita had on that clinician hat and used that language, you know, over identifying, compliance. And those words are barriers to understanding in that relationship. I thought, on the other hand, realistic Rita was desperately trying to listen and hear what idealistic Ivana was trying to say. So kudos for that. Clearly, it's a new role in the organization, and realistic Rita was feeling her way, but you know what came across was what you would expect. Realistic Rita's worldview is from the perspective of, you know, probably a traditional clinician. It's very interesting.
Yep, and from my perspective, I was really just trying to make sure that Barry was going to be safe from the perspective of the court order, making sure that he was complying with the court order, that he wasn't going to get in more trouble by trying to push back against that. That's what was going on in the back of my mind. So trying to figure out how to navigate that was how I was playing it. So with that, we'll go on to our next role play. This is sort of a take two, and this time this is a role play, the very same situation, and Ivana is again going to play the role of the peer specialist, but this time she's going to be working with a very seasoned supervisor who has lived experience himself and is a peer-informed supervisor. He understands the values and guidelines of peer support. Do I want to read the scenario again, Jonathan? Or do you think we're good to go?
I think we're good to go. We're talking about Barry, and I think Ivana bringing the situation to supervision will remind everyone some of the important aspects of Barry's situation.
Okay. Ready? Begin.
Hi, Ivana. How you doing today?
Hey, how's it going, Jonathan? I wanted to talk to you about Barry.
Right. You've been working with the gentleman for, I don't know, like 6 weeks now.
Right, exactly. You know, the background is that, you know, he's got a bit of a weight issue, and you know, it's making him very frustrated. The backstory is he's actually the last person in his family not to have diabetes, and he's very worried about that in his life. It really stresses him. He doesn't want to become a diabetic. He's gained, you know, about 60 pounds in 4 months. You know, we've been trying different, you know, different techniques. He's been, you know, doing a little bit of harm reduction with smaller plates. He's been writing down in a food journal what he's been eating. But really nothing's really helped. You know, and I can really identify with this, that he is feeling that, you know, I have diabetes in my family, and I can really identify with this fear of not wanting to get that dreaded disease and what it means. And, you know, I feel like, you know, as a peer specialist, what I want to do is I really want to advocate for Barry. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I became a peer specialist, is to advocate for peers. So what I'd actually like to do is, spoken to Barry a bit, he's okay with the idea of it. I want to go to his doctor. You know, I really want to stress the fact that Barry is the center of his treatment plan. and the doctor really needs to reconsider the medication. Um, and I wanted to approach you before I did that.
Well, thanks so much, Ivana. I really appreciate it. And I just want to, may I give you some feedback just to say that you've been doing a lot of work with Barry, and, you know, our efforts don't always show immediate results, but I just want to let you know that, you know, like working with him and, you know, working on the smaller portions, really finding out, you know, working with him about more nutritious ways to eat, you know, even sort of planning for when he is discharged, like things that he can do, like walking to the fresh market. You know, those are all seeds, and, you know, seeds take a while to, you know, sprout sometimes. But I just want to acknowledge, just because you're not seeing, you know, instant results doesn't mean that, you know, there's no growth happening. The other thing I wanted to say is, you know, you talked a lot about Barry's interest in writing, and I
Yeah.
think it's great that you want to advocate for him, and go to the doctor. And I mean, I think that kind of speaks to the spirit of, you know, like what we do as peer supporters. Like, we want to facilitate change for people. But I know we also talked about, like, you know, Barry feeling like he wasn't able to use his voice, and he also likes to write. And I think
Yeah.
in working with the doctor, my opinion is that it might be really impactful if you accompanied Barry, but Barry spoke to the doctor himself, and perhaps before the appointment, sort of write a letter outlining what the concerns are. You know, we also oftentimes talk about how when we show up at places prepared, that we're treated better, whether it's going into a store and sort of being a little bit certain of what it is we're looking for, or, you know, just having some certainty and being able to use our own voice. So, you know, I was wondering how you felt about maybe, you know, suggesting to Barry that he write the letter to the doctor, you know, prior to the next appointment, and sort of outline some of the things that he wanted to talk about.
Right. And I can hear what you're saying. He is a great journaler. You know, he loves to journal, and that's really one of his strengths is writing. That's so true. But you don't think that I should go and just let that doctor know, you know, that Barry needs to be the center of his treatment plan? I mean, I'm a certified peer specialist, and we have an advocacy module that we go through, and I feel like this is an opportunity for me to advocate for Barry. I hear what you mean about, like, getting him to write his own plan, but I mean,
Well, I
isn't
think it's
that what we're
important.
supposed to do as peer specialists?
Yeah, I think it's important to find out how Barry feels about it.
Oh,
Sometimes our best efforts in speaking for other people don't land very well, and it's actually what the person may not want or need, but perhaps just the encouragement to use his own voice. And I think, if anything, it would be really important to, you know, to kind of tease this out with Barry a little bit, and, you know, maybe do a role play with him. You
oh,
know, I know that, you know, like sometimes working with the clinical staff, it can be, you know, really difficult.
yeah,
But, you know, I think Barry's willing to use his own voice based on what you've told me. And it might be
right.
really powerful for you to advocate with him, you know, by
Okay,
being there and identifying your role as someone who's working with him, but, you know, allowing him to use his own voice,
okay.
you know.
I
Just, if I may, just
Yeah.
one more thing. You know, there's a training that is taking place at the Office of Mental Health, and I know that, you know, Celia Brown, and she has a lot of trainings going on. And there was one in
Yeah.
advocacy, self-advocacy, and systems advocacy. And, you know,
Uh-huh.
I'd like to recommend that you look into taking that. You're entitled to, you know, training days, and, you know, training
Uh-huh.
that supports your practice. And, you know, I would really encourage you to do that, to, you know, like, hone your skills and your passion. And
Okay.
also, you know,
It's
we
a
need to
great
think
idea.
about how to
Thank
work with the other staff to, you know, sort of help them to understand what your role is, and, like, what some of the concerns are that come up with, you know, people that we're working with, and,
you.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, how we want to sort of address those. So those are some of the suggestions that I would make. And
I
I'm
see.
not sure, maybe you have something else that, you know, you'd like to run by me or discuss.
Well, I mean, I really see what you're saying, I guess, in terms of, like, making sure that Barry has a voice for himself, because he's told to do the medication. He's told to stop, you know, he's being told what to do. So I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of having Barry speak for himself, but have me be a support along with him. I see how that would be more in line with, you know, making Barry, like, giving Barry the power that he deserves. You know, so I really appreciate that. And the training, I would love the training. That would be great. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. And most of all, you know, this, sometimes we forget that this is a human rights issue, and that, you know, a person's sense of choice. I mean, we say that recovery involves choice, but it doesn't
Right.
really sound like Barry's aware that there's choice here. And
Mm.
I think part of your role is, like, it's not just facilitating change in the system, but facilitating change in our mindset.
Uh-huh.
You know, that, like, he has a really powerful voice, and I
Yeah.
think that, you know, he might be heard very differently if he's talking and you're not talking for him.
Yeah.
Because that also can create some triangulation, and, you know, we talked about that as well. But, you know,
Right.
really good job. And, you know,
Thank
why don't we
you.
check back in tomorrow and, you know, let me know if you've gotten any feedback from Barry in terms of how he feels about all this.
Okay. All
Okay?
right. Thank
All
you
right. Well,
so
listen,
much,
thanks so
Jonathan.
much. I'm glad you stopped in. Good work.
Thanks.
Wow, wonderful job, guys. Thank you. So now it's the audience participation piece. Once again, we're going to do an agree or disagree poll. Just as a reminder for those who came in a little bit late, what we will be doing is Varsha will put the poll in the chat, and what
I
you'll do
did
is
already.
you'll click on that, and then you'll make sure that you click the Zoom to come back to the session when you're done. So we'll give you like 2 minutes to finish that up, and I'll just put up on the screen, you know, our 6 principles for the role of the supervisor in helping the peer specialist. We'll go on to the last 3. And when we're done with that, we'll have Varsha share her screen.
Hold on. I had
Yep.
my screen. I disappeared.
Let me know when you're ready.
Yes.
Okay.
Give me just a minute.
Varsha, you're doing great. Thank you so much. This is going really smoothly.
Don't jinx me.
I take it back.
Give me just a minute. Really?
Well, while we're waiting, I just wanted to say how much I appreciated, you know, the entire role play. Ivana, you were just, you know, right in there with, I just really want to make sure Barry's needs are met and I want to do the best job that I can, but I'm really asking you for guidance. You know, that's exactly what peers, as peers we should do, is go to our
Right.
supervisors. And Jonathan, amazing job of just sort of teasing out where to empower Barry, to give Barry the sense of empowerment and asking the right questions that got Ivana thinking about what she needed to do. I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah. And, you know, as a peer, I can say in that scenario, you know, first of all, it wasn't centered on me and I wasn't being asked if I was over-identifying. And with, you know, that was refreshing. And, you know, second, it was, you know, it felt empowering to still come with the fervor of a advocate, but have it be directed in a way that is and shown in a way that is pro Barry. You know, it was like night and day, honestly.
And Ivana, what I liked about the second role play is how much Jonathan partnered with you and with Barry.
Yeah.
There wasn't that power differential. It was a partnership, a kind of problem solving that you both were engaged in.
Right.
I didn't know if you sensed that, but that's what I saw.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
like
so
to look at
let's
the
step
responses.
through what you all thought. So we're doing a side-by-side comparison at this point. On the left side, we see what you felt as far as what you saw with Realistic Rita, and on the right side, this is what you felt you saw with Jonathan. So define and model advocacy for the peer support specialist, including advocating for organizational changes. Looks like Jonathan won that one. Okay, good job, Jonathan. And then number 2, coaching the peer support specialist on how to respect the rights of individuals while helping individuals challenge and overcome injustice. Looks like Jonathan won that one too. Okay. Number 3, build on lived experience, model recovery, and advocate for the peer support workers. Once again, we had a unanimous agreement on that one. So Jonathan's right, 3 for 3. Let's see what we've got here. Assist colleagues to understand the peer specialist role in the perspective of the experience of the peer support specialist. So not unanimous, but certainly still much better than what Realistic Rita did. Number 5, identify situations in which the supervisor has responsibility to address agency liability and maintain respectful communication. Once again, pretty close to unanimous that Jonathan was doing that, whereas it was more of a 50-50 split with Realistic Rita. And finally, number 6, protect or provide time and support for peer specialists to connect with and participate in the greater peer movement in the peer support workforce profession. And once again, Jonathan almost unanimously, there was an almost unanimous agreement with that as well. So thank you very much, Varsha. That was very, very helpful to have you supporting us in getting that poll. These polls are not always easy to do, and Zoom has a polling feature, but it doesn't do this kind of complexity. So we behind the scenes needed to try to figure out a way to do what we were trying to show here, a side-by-side comparison, and have the polls come out correctly.
Can we
So
leave
once
it
again,
up for a little bit, Rita? Can we leave the data up? I'm sorry to cut you off. I just didn't want Varsha to take it down. Can we scroll back to number 4? I believe it's question 4. And I really appreciate that, there wasn't unanimous agreement here, because just to be transparent, one of the things, and, given that this was a role play and we really want to kind of hit on, the practices of the supervisor in promoting the behavior or the practice of the peer specialist, that, this piece around assisting colleagues to understand the peer specialist role and the perspective and experience of peer support specialists, this oftentimes gets overlooked. And I know that just doing a role play, I really wanted to get that in before we finished to say, yeah, we need to talk to other staff. So I was so aware that I put it in as an add-on. I wanted to cover it, but I know just from my own practice and experience that it's something that oftentimes gets overlooked because we're so accustomed to dealing on the micro level, to use that sort of systems term of dealing with the individual and dealing with the doctor and dealing with the nurse, but not really looking at the overall system and the culture change and how engaging other staff and engaging their difference and meeting them where they're at and kind of talking with them and exploring their fears and maybe having them identify people in their personal lives who might be going through these things, and trying to create that inroad to really understand that this has to be a system-wide effort and not just, from participant to peer specialist to, clinical provider, but that it's important to really bring the other staff into the fold to understand what's happening and the changes that we're seeking.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I want to try to wind us up pretty quickly here because I want to be sure that Joanne has an opportunity to talk about the research that she's done. So let's go to that slide. Varsha, you'll need to stop sharing for a moment. Okay. So this is just sort of how we can put these into practice. Yvonne, I'm going to come back to this at the end. I'm going to jump to Joanne right now, if that's okay.
Sure thing. Sure thing.
All right. So Joanne, take it away.
Thank you, Rita. As I was looking at this role play, it really was bringing me back in time. I've been in and around peer support for more years than I'm going to ever admit to. And as self-help, moved into more traditional settings, what I was looking at were all these barriers and challenges that I'm sure a lot of members of this audience have experienced. And what I saw secondarily is that the literature basically suggested supervision as the answer to all the problems that peers were having as they joined teams with a colleague of colleagues in other professions. And it got me to thinking, because it was obvious to me what the problem was, which was you were having folks who were not peers supervising peers, two totally different professions. And I've always believed that you learn your craft in an apprenticeship. You know, we learn many things in our life from going to other people who have, to use an old phrase, been there, done that. So as a result of this mystery to me and really not knowing what to do about it, I decided to get my doctorate and do my dissertation on this topic. And as I said earlier, what I chose to study, and I didn't realize that no one else had done this, was what was going on between peer support specialists and non-peer supervisors, particularly, as Rita said, after 2007, when Medicaid became a billable peer support service. We saw an explosion of peer support workers going into more traditional settings. So what did I find? Well, the obvious umbrella issue is that if the relationship between a supervisor and a supervisee is positive and good, that's the key ingredient. And that is true of any supervision. So that's not a surprise. But I was really interested in, so how does that work? I had people talk to me about their positive experiences and their negative experiences in supervision. Next slide, please. And what I learned from talking to all these people across the United States is that certainly supervision is perceived as positive if the supervisor listens, is available, works in a mutual way to set goals for supervision, is transparent, is responsible, and is also realistic. Another kind of umbrella takeaway. Next slide. And by the way, folks, I could talk about this all day. My colleagues have told me I don't have all day, so I am doing a treetop kind of, here are the important takeaways for your consideration. But the interviews and the experiences of your colleagues and peers across the country was very rich and very informative. So here's no surprise. The number one finding is that peer support workers, peer support specialists, whatever you call yourself, if you're functioning as a peer, the preference is to be supervised by a more experienced peer. And the peer support specialists out there found very creative ways to make that happen. The second finding is the supervisor attitude. If the supervisor's attitude was one of respect for the peer role, the supervisor didn't need to understand all about the peer role, but if they were willing to learn, if they were willing to say, you know what, I respect that you're here, I value that you're here, I don't know what you do, but you do. They supported autonomy. These supervisors said, you know what you're doing, you go do it. I've got your back. You have autonomy. It really stood out as a difference between micromanaging and assigning tasks and having faith and respect in that peer role that said, go do your job. The other major finding, again, it's not going to be a surprise, I'm sure, to this audience, is that role integration is incomplete. And we're talking more than a decade since 2007. It's been a long time since peers have officially, through Medicaid, come to the workforce in large numbers. Yet what we see over and over and over again is that colleagues don't understand the role, they don't know what to do with the role. So the supervisor plays a pivotal role in helping the peer integrate seamlessly into the team. And there are ways that a supervisor can do that. I'll mention one of them, which is something I call perspective taking. What that is when the peer and the supervisor plotted together to insert the peer into everything the team did. Team meetings, team discussions, team visits. And that gave the peer an opportunity to demonstrate their role, but also to kind of reprioritize how they spoke about everything they knew about their service user, so that they were able to share what the team wanted to hear. And you and I know that there are differences. Sometimes the team just wants to know, does this person have a place to live? Does this person have social support? Is this person staying on their medication? Those are not of the greatest interest most of the time to peer support workers. We're about, who is this person? What do they want? What do they want their recovery to look like? What do they want from their life? But sometimes advancing these other issues help a peer integrate into a team and impact that team in the way they wanted. The third finding, which is important, is that trauma-informed supervision is required. Peers talked about compassion fatigue. All healthcare workers talk about compassion fatigue, but what peers were saying is because of their use of self, their complete use of self in their daily practice, compassion fatigue, that feeling of burnout, that feeling like I just can't do this, happens quicker and more often. And to have a supervisor who can debrief regularly offset some of those feelings. The other issue, which I'll just mention, but it needs its own time, is, and I'm forgetting what it is, moral injury. That peers reported beyond compassion fatigue, they were feeling that they had to witness things that just felt wrong to them, that they were really outraged morally. And many folks were deciding to leave the profession because they just could not go and participate in what they viewed as things that were just wrong. Obviously, trauma-informed supervision supports self-care. But what folks said is self-care is for everyone. You know, don't pick me out and just focus self-care on me because I happen to have a diagnosis and a lived experience. Self-care is for everyone. And lastly, and again, this is a very big topic, but in the service of time, I'm going to cut it short. The supervisor's ability to build support for the peer service, for the peer support specialist and their service users was critical. Constructing networks both inside the work and outside of the work is really important to sustaining peers in the workforce. And I will just loop around in my final moment here to talk about advocacy, because making sure that there are networks both inside work and outside of work, and marching towards the reality of a career ladder so that there are more experienced peers available as supervisors is going to take advocacy on all our part. So again, that's kind of the quick and dirty overview. I'm certainly excited to talk more about it at any time, but in the essence of time, I'm going to hand it back to my colleagues for, I guess, questions.
Actually, we're going to need to wrap up because we're right at the 4 o'clock mark. You did mention that the supervisor's attitude is critical. What I would like to say is we just need to wrap up now, but I believe the 4 of us are willing to stick around for a few minutes to answer questions. Let me just finish the rest of the slides here. This is the Workforce Development and Supervision Work Group that had come together at what used to be NYAPRS and is now the National Association of Peer Supporters. And these are the references. And this is how you can reach us. I'll just leave that up on the screen for a moment. And I'll say, for those of you who have to leave right now at 4 o'clock, we're glad that you were here. I think, Daniela, is it okay if we hang out for another 5 to 10 minutes to answer questions, or do we have to drop off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just going to say, that's why I came back on screen. So I did put in a link if folks did want to go into the main Zoom room for Harvey's closing remarks. Feel free to do that. But we also have about 6 questions. If you wanted to hang out, we can certainly do that and answer some of those questions as well.
Can we just make sure that we capture the questions as well so we can maybe answer them and sort of append that to our presentation that will be posted?
Yeah, and we're going to keep the chat log as well, and we can send that to you if you'd like. All right, so let's get started. First question actually is like a double question. Has APS developed any modules centered around peer supervision yet? And where can you find the guidelines on the core values?
The answer is yes. We actually have 2 supervision courses in what we call our supervision track, and Jonathan Edwards and Gita Enders were our subject matter experts for that. Jonathan, do you want to say anything about the courses?
Yes, I would encourage you, if you're enrolled in APS, to go on and you know, take the course, and if there's an opportunity to give us feedback, because we're always trying to improve upon these things. You know, we know nothing is static. But yes, and we're also working on some new products in APS, and also with more local certification boards.
And the supervision guidelines are in the latest iteration of the courses. So yes, that is available too. Yep.
Awesome. What qualifications should a supervisor have? Should they also be a certified peer?
Well, if you look at my research, the resounding answer to that question would be yes, they should be a certified peer. Of course, we live in the real world where that is not totally accomplished. So I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but certainly the minimum is a respect and an understanding for the peer role. And we also know that working in a recovery-focused agency tends to be more supportive to peer support workers than those agencies that are still struggling to become recovery-oriented.
Did anybody else want to add to that? Okay. I'm just answering a question about what a SERPA is in the chat box, but those folks are certified by OASAS, not OMH. Next question is actually a really easy one. When you're, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. When you're talking about peer specialists today, are you talking about adult peers or family peers as well, or other types of peers?
All of the above, adult and family.
And the last question is a really interesting one. Do you have any resources for additional supervision for someone who would like to have some supervision, but not from their direct boss, their supervisor?
So there's the Wellness Collaborative of New York. There are 10 peer-run organizations that are doing a lot with supervision. So if you look up the Wellness Coalition, WCNY.
WCNY, yeah.
Yeah, yep. That would be a great place to start, because they then can reach out to other areas in your region, or, you know, there may be a lot of opportunities for Zoom supervision these days. So yeah.
Probably, yeah. All right, so I think that about covers all the questions in the chat box. You guys have been amazing. I want to personally thank all of you, Jonathan, Joanne, Rita, Ivana, and oh, I'm forgetting Varsha. And thank you so much, Varsha, for being with us as well. This is awesome. Again, please join us in the main room for Harvey's closing remarks. And hopefully we'll see you all again. We'll see you tonight, actually, for the evening program. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much, Daniela.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Daniela, thank you.
Take care.